So, Bontemps, you talked before, when OG Anunoby got injured, you talked about how you thought this was the lineup they would go to. They didn't. They went with Achua in the first two games without Anunoby. Instantaneous difference with Deuce McBride in this game. And not just because he had, well, first off, I'm going to tell you one thing. It was like, when you play video games and they're, you got the guy, some of the guys have you put a guy who has a full bar of power and he's moving faster. Like he hadn't played all those minutes. So instantaneously, Deuce, he's quick anyway, but he was just moving faster than everybody. You could tangibly tell how much more life he had in his legs. That is number one. Number two, Bontemps, it changed the way the Pacers had to defend, and this lineup is something you thought that Tibbs would go to earlier.
Yeah, I mean, during the regular season, this starting five or this five-man group, when they were without Julius Randle, OG Anunoby, and Mitchell Robinson, they went to this group a bunch of Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Isaiah Hartenstein. It absolutely throttled teams. That had crazy plus-minus. It was a super lineup. And I thought they would go to it because Indiana's generally playing small. They're starting Andrew Nembhard. They're playing him and Halliburton together a lot. They're playing TJ McConnell out there with those guys. Tibbs initially did decide to go big. I don't think he generally likes the Pascal Siakam, Josh Hart matchup. Siakam's had a pretty good time of it against Hart. But you looked in this game, the Knicks they ran a million guard screening actions to get Jalen Brunson onto Andrew Nembhard, who he has.
I will give you the exact number.
Series. Oh, you got it there? What do you got?
Thanks to Stats Williams. So the most ball screens, in other words, you're setting a screen for the guy who's got the ball.
Mm-hmm.
The most ball screens Deuce McBride had set in his career in one game was 8. Okay, because he's
first quarter today.
He's 6'2",
maybe,
and you don't typically have guard to guard screens. You typically have the big man or a wing or a big man setting a screen for a smaller player and let the ball handler work. You sometimes see big to big screens, but guard to guard screens, anecdotally, are the most rare screens that you have. Well, the problem that the Knicks had, and we're trying to figure out, was Nesmith was just all over Brunson.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose you could have had Isaiah Hartenstein go down there to half court and just blast Nesmith off of Brunson and to free up the pressure. But then Hartenstein is 40 feet from the basket and you need him down there. That's not effective. That's not a super effective strategy. Maybe you can do that once or twice. The other option could be you have somebody else bring the ball up the court so that Brunson doesn't face that pressure. But, the Knicks, Brunson's their best ball handler. I mean, Josh Hart can do it. McBride himself can do it, but you're doing lesser than. So what Tibbs did was had McBride set the screen. So McBride's man was Andrew Nembhard, the guy that they took off of Jalen Brunson.
The guy Brunson lit up.
That's right.
Games.
Barbecue chicken.
So out comes McBride. First off, they're just a better shooting lineup with them out there, and you can spread the floor a little bit better. Secondly, when McBride sets the screen, Nembhard's going to switch, and all of a sudden, the Knicks have remanufactured the matchup they want, which is Nembhard. So getting back to it, McBride, the most ball screens he'd set in a game in his career before tonight was 8. He set 23.
Yeah,
and I don't have how many
like
were for
that
Brunson.
matchup.
I don't know how many they had for Brunson, but I'll bet it was at least 20.
Well, I was going to say, I'll set the over at 20.5.
Well, and the other thing, too, you mentioned the shooting. I just want to highlight that real quick. I thought that if you have Precious out there with Josh Hart and Isaiah Hartenstein, you don't have very much shooting on the court. It's really just Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo, right? You can load up, in particular on Jalen then, makes life a lot more difficult for him. Deuce McBride being out there, he's a big-time three-point shooter at this point. He's somebody they're going to have to guard. You've got that extra shooting element out there. Really changes the geometry of the court. Now, I think that played, a real role because you can't just run away from him to go attack Jalen. Like, you have to respect his ability to shoot the ball. And I think that also played a big role beyond the obvious. We were talking about it first couple of minutes of the game. It was obvious what they were doing right off the jump.
So the other thing that this is, they put McBride on Halliburton defensively, which we'll talk about in a second. So a couple things happened right out of the gate when this was going on. First off, McBride was getting open because Neesmith was trying to sort of hedge back and, still try to deal, even though he was getting screened, still try to deal with Brunson. And so McBride was getting wide open shots and he started hitting them, made a couple of baskets right out of the gate, had 17 for the game. And once Brunson started going, Rick Carlisle's counter move was to double team Brunson so that when the screen would come up, instead of him ending up with Nembhard on him, they would just trap him. And that is something that Brunson and the Knicks are comfortable with.
Well, and they were garbage double teams. They were slow.
That's true.
They were not purposeful with it. They would kind of meander over and just let Jalen throw.
They're not
the ball
a good
over
defensive
top.
team, and
No,
it showed
not.
up in the way they double teamed.
Yes, 100%.
And so they would then play 4-on-3, and a couple of things happened there. One, it generated open looks for McBride and Hart and DiVincenzo. And those guys, other than DiVincenzo, has gone ice cold, but those guys started making threes. And even Alec Burks later on. Alec Burks came off the bench, who's been a revelation in this series, hit 5 threes. Yeah. The other thing is when you're playing 4-3, and one of those guys is Isaiah Hartenstein, when you do miss, Hartenstein, it's a 4-on-3 game, and Hartenstein is an absolute
every
demon.
One of them.
Yes,
the man had 12 offensive rebounds.
I mean, for most 12. Of the first. Yes. I mean, you could see we had the two questions. How's Jalen going to look? And are the Knicks going to have energy? The tone of the game was set in the first 2 minutes of the game when Isaiah Hartenstein had 17 offensive rebounds and a couple of blocks and was just shot out of an absolute cannon in the first 2 minutes of the game. And he set the tone for how the night was going to go. And look, you knew with the Carden crowd, you had a pretty good idea that the Knicks were going to have some energy today playing at home. But Hartenstein talked after game 4 about how their effort was not acceptable, and he stepped up and delivered above and beyond what you could have hoped for if you were a Knicks fan. And it just, like right from the beginning of the game, they set the tone of how they were going to play. And Indiana, across the board, did not handle it at all. And I mean, I think you're going to talk about it now, Brian. I think that certainly includes Tyrese Halliburton, who we've talked about a ton on the pod and has had some great games in the series and did not do a whole lot today.
So what was happening was Hartenstein was not only getting rebounds, he was then making passes to guys who were hitting shots. And, the other day, Tyrese Halliburton said that when you're in the Garden, when the Knicks get an offensive rebound and kick it out for a 3, that the effect that it has on the crowd, because they react so positively to the Knicks getting an offensive rebound, that it's like the same as like a windmill dunk. Like that's how the crowd reacts, because that's what they've used to watch all year. And so Hartenstein had 17 rebounds and 5 assists, bunch of those, assists, setting up threes. The last player in a playoff game to have 12 offensive rebounds and 5 assists. Did you guys see this one?
I did not.
Oh,
Moses Malone.
Moses Malone.
Should have assumed
1982.
That's a pretty good company to be in.
Greatest offensive rebounder in history. Pretty much an unbreakable offensive rebounding record for a career, especially if you include his ABA numbers. We've gone over this before.
Yeah, it's laughable. And by the way, to that end, the way Isaiah Hartenstein played was a huge part of why the Knicks had 29 more shots.
This is just an unbelievable stat. Exactly. It's the biggest shot differential in the playoffs since 2008. 29 more shots, 53 to 29 on rebounds. I mean, come on, you can't win. 20 to 5 offensive rebounds, second chance points, 26 to 9. Paint points 62 to 36. I mean, Rick Carlisle said after the game, he says this was an embarrassing performance. And
which ref did he blame?
He said nobody on our team. What's that? What he said? What did you say?
Which ref did he blame?
He didn't blame any ref.
Oh, okay.
I thought
Todd Foster was in the building, and
I thought this quote from Rick Carlisle summed up the whole night. He got asked after the game if losing the rebounding battle was a, quote, technique thing. Technique? It was box outs for sure. Look, It's just cold-blooded desire to go get the ball, to make contact with somebody and go get the ball. That's what it is, and we did not do it, so we paid a heavy price. And that sums up the game. The Knicks met the moment, responded to the crowd, and played like their heads were on fire the whole game. And the Pacers didn't handle it. They just across the board. Tyrese Halliburton was invisible. The Pacers were they lost their emotions on multiple occasions. They didn't handle the moment very well. And as a result, this turned into a bloodbath.
Also, just a reminder, there's really like momentum game to game, I don't think is much of a thing in the playoffs, right?
No.
The Pacers absolutely just clobbered them. I mean, humiliated them on.
And that game was over 8 minutes into the game on Sunday.
Yeah, on Sunday afternoon. And it's not like you take that 40-point lead or whatever it ended up being.
Right, swing it over.
On the road with you. And completely different game. And game 6 will be its own entity. And we'll see how the Pacers respond.
Yeah, and they're going to have a better strategy to deal with the guard-to-guard pick and rolls, especially with McBride. And if they do double Brunson, they can't half bleep it. But no. I mean, I think we can, considering the Hartenstein numbers, and by the way, we didn't even say it. I mean, Jalen had 44.
And there's all kinds of numbers now where it's like, it's a short list where it's Michael Jordan, Jerry West, Jalen Brunson, and depending on what the stat is, there might be like a Bernard King and somebody else in there. But what he's doing with these 40-point games, it's 5 now in the playoffs. I mean, it's insane.
Well, this is a Habistro stat. We'll give our guy Tom Habistro some credit.
Who?
Since 1990, there are 4 guys who've scored at least 373 points, which is a random number I know, through 11 games, about 33 points a game or so. Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Jalen Brunson. It's pretty good. It's pretty good company for Mr. Brunson to be in.
Yeah, and so we'll make McBride and Brunson our reliable connection today, brought to you by Xfinity, and with a leading or a supporting role by Isaiah Hartenstein. The Villanova boys have cooled off a little bit.
And now they get an extra couple days off, which is going to be pretty vital for these Knicks guys who are absolutely gassed. I mean, it's going to be big for them to have 2 days off, thanks to Caitlin Clark having her debut at home on Thursday. Get an extra day, get some rest, and we'll see how this thing goes Friday night. I mean, obviously they're going to pod again on Thursday, but Indiana hasn't lost at home yet in the playoffs, and certainly played well in the 2 games there. And it's also going to be, if the Pacers win that game, it's a very quick turnaround to game 7. And I think despite the fact that Indiana hasn't looked great at the Garden in this series, I think that favors Indiana given how beat up the Knicks are at this point. So, obviously you like having game 7 at home, but the Knicks, I think, would be very wise to try to close this thing out Friday and get this thing over.